Our first speaker today will be Weyman Bennett. Weyman is the joint convener of Stand Up to Racism. He's a leading member of the Socialist Workers Party, and he's one of the authors of this book, Say It Loud, Marxism and the Fight Against Racism, which is available at Bookmarks. The way that the meeting will work, in case anyone hasn't been to one of these already, is that Weyman and then our second speaker will both get to introduce the topic. We will then open it up for discussion. People can raise their hands from the floor, and I'll call people up to raise questions and make points through the microphone over there. And then at the end, the speakers will come back at the end and answer the questions. So they're not ignoring you if you're raising questions and points, but they will sum it all up at the end of the meeting. So without any further ado, I will introduce Weyman Bennett.
Okay. Thank you, comrade. I want to quote the words of Amber Rudd, and it goes like this. 2 days before she resigned, she said this: "Somebody has done something deplorable in my department. They have been unfair. They have treated people in the worst manner. Somebody's responsible for this." Now, coming from a minister who's in charge of the department, right, that somebody is you. Look in the mirror, right? You want to know who did it? You did it. Do you mean you don't want to know who's responsible? You're responsible. And it's an amazing kind of coincidence that suddenly people find out that the level of racism that they put forward was rejected. But when you read the cases that were in The Guardian or in anywhere else, the sheer deluge of families being deported, people losing access to healthcare, their pensions, their right to jobs, devastating working class people's lives. Why did they do it? Why did we have a hostile environment? Because it's within the DNA of the ruling class party. But it goes much, much, much deeper than that. For us to understand where the hostile environment comes from, there's a phrase that's put forward by Tariq Ali, where he says there's a crisis of the extreme centre, that there's a crisis within capitalism, within the way that it runs, that the crisis means that they can't hold it together. And the way I characterise this is if you look in 2014, the vote for UKIP, when it won 4 million votes, and the failure of David Cameron and Theresa May to get a majority inside Parliament meant that they had to start looking around from their extreme centre. In other words, the impact of racist populism, the rise of UKIP, has had on the Tory party is to pull it further to the right. And how do we know this? Do you remember what this? In 2010, Angela Merkel and David Cameron made a speech in Munich at the same time as the EDL was marching, and in there they said, we have to have muscular liberalism. There's been too much state multiculturalism. And this has alienated, as they said, white working class people from being attracted to what they call state politics. We at the time had noted this change within the ruling class, that they had started a politics of scapegoating. And they said that state multiculturalism was the reason why. This was backed up by a man called Willits. They called him Two Brains Willits. I have no idea, because if you're a Tory minister, you've not got two brains. I don't even believe you've got one brain, right? But they said that this guy was the intellectual, and what he said was the welfare state was declining because people hadn't been persuaded to support it because they could see immigrants and migrants taking the best of it. Not only that, these arguments were backed up by, you probably don't read this, The Spectator. There's a guy called Murray inside there. And actually, further to that, there's a man called Trevor Phillips, who used to head up the CRE, that turned around and actually accepted some of these arguments. There was a debate that took place actually under New Labour about what was taking place. The attitude to migrants and immigration has been a problem, became part of it. But I want to focus on what that opening up of the institutional racism meant. Because I can remember the acts, the 2012 Act, the 2010 Act, we defended, we put forward a document which thousands of people wrote in defence of multiculturalism. And part of that act was centralised around two things: Islamophobia and hostility, anti-immigrant racism towards Eastern Europeans. In other words, the growth of Eastern European labour had led to an attempt to try and scapegoat people. There's 150,000 homes built in Britain a year, 300,000 are needed. Who's to blame? You start scapegoating Eastern Europeans and you start blaming people. Actually, one of the interesting things about the hostile environment was when you argued with actually older West Indians, some older West Indians, about what was going on, many people thought this was directed actually against Eastern Europeans. I remember having an argument in Tottenham. People said, I'm worried about blow-ins come in to take our role. When you look at it now, one lesson you always know is that when you allow one racism to grow, then actually it feeds into every other one of the racism. You can't, if you let Islamophobia grow, then actually what you see is the growth of older racisms against West Indians, and that's part of what the state set up. I want to just focus on something called the Operation Vacant. I don't know, people might not remember Operation Vacant. Operation Vacant is the go-home vans. And the reason why Operation Vacant caught my eye was because if you listen to whenever they come up with a pseudonym, institutional, and they're going to do something bad to you, they usually give it a positive name, don't they? Operation U-Tree, or Operation Bumblebee, which was about stopping burglaries. But Operation Vacant, it's a Norse word. It's an old Norse word. And the only place you hear that is the alt-right. The alt-right keep talking about awakening. That's what it means. It means awakening. And for those people that have fortunate or whatever it is, had an experience I have, which I was taught to read the Bible backwards, do you mean? It's my way to heaven, right? As a child, I was drummed into you. You have to know the Bible. God will let you in when you read it to them in that way. But if Matthew 25, verses 13, it says, watch there, for you do not know whether they're coming, you do not know whether they're coming in the day nor the hour. It's a kind of warning word. When you see that word, it's a warning. You don't know when God's going to come for you, right? And it's also a warning word for those people who are having their culture stolen from them and the people doing it. I've got nothing, but it's about who came up with the idea? It came within the bowels of the Home Office. Who was in charge of the Home Office at that time? The architect of the hostile environment is not Amber Rudd, but Theresa May. Theresa May has gone out of her way to emphasise why migrants are not welcome. And part of that crisis was that they saw the growth of the UKIP vote, and what they wanted to try and work on was how to get the 4 million UKIP votes. And what they wanted to do, the hostile environment, was to convince people that they had their heart of those people when they did that. And that's when you suddenly saw David Cameron talking about people refusing to integrate. Why don't they learn English? Or why don't they speak British? By the way, at the same time as cutting ESOL provision. So the hostile environment was not an accident. You know when they keep saying, we don't know how this happened. But another part of the hostile environment was this. When they used that level of racism, they didn't expect a backlash against it. They didn't understand the backlash. And the reason they didn't understand the backlash is to do with the nature of the ruling class and the nature of the working class. You see, they have public schools, which is not public. They have private hospitals. They travel in cars which nobody else travels in. They are a class that is separate from us. When we live cheek by jowl. We don't choose our neighbours. We are integrated, we are chosen because the question of how much you can afford, where your kids go to school. Our kids are multilingual, our kids are multi-faith, our kids are multiracial. Actually, if you look at the working class over the last 20 years, it's much more integrated. So when racism comes along, actually the way racism works is it does work by competition. If people say, do you want more migrants? A large number of people say, I don't want more migrants. Because what they think about more migrants is more competition for the health service, more competition for homes, more competition for jobs. If you say, do you want to get rid of Andre, who you've lived next to for 10 years? He's not a migrant, he's my mate. Do you mean? He's not, and if you say, he's the problem, actually people don't accept that. In other words, people have a contradictory nature in their head, and actually when people think about migrants or anybody else, actually the nature of the working class forces people to come together. Now the Tories don't understand that. If you're in the Tory party, you don't come together. You work out how to attack us. How do we know this? Have a look at the cabinet. Boris Johnson is a foreign minister. He's been sent to Singapore to win a trade deal. What does he read to them? Kipling. Right, that's going to the road to Mandalay. That's going to convince the foreigners and the natives to hand over their hard cash because I've learnt Kipling. Right? His aide has to jump on him and cover his mouth in the hope that the other person who's Oxford educated doesn't understand that he's been insulted by the foreign minister who's then going to try and offer him a deal. Right? That's Boris Johnson. That's the future in terms of the British ruling class. That's their plan. Right? We're in luck there. He compares himself to Churchill. Churchill was dangerous, right? Churchill thought about things. I'm rubbing my hands. If we're involved in a struggle and Boris is the leader, we've got a chance. Because the truth of it is, right, if he's the best the ruling class can come up with, and I'm not arguing they're not a dangerous ruling class, but we may be fortunate. Do you mean? No, sometimes you have Napoleon, and then you have Napoleon III. Napoleon was technically a genius. Napoleon III was an idiot, right? We might have that contradiction. Read Marx. Marx writes about this. Sorry, I'm digressing, getting carried away. Right, but the point about it is, when you look at what's been taking place, you see from 1945 to the present day, there have been mass migrations to Britain. One of the best things actually that happened was Cheddar Man. You know, I don't know if you know about Cheddar Man. They found that in the Cheddar Gorge, they checked the DNA of somebody and found that he was black with blue eyes. I want my country back. Do you mean the idea that was presented, the whole idea of Britishness was actually, there's a really narrow view of Britishness that there hasn't been for 11,000 years. Waves of migration coming to this country, changing its nature. The very language. When they talk about Islam, it's even, you know, the word admiral. That's Arabic. When you look at the numbers, it's too late. Do you know what I mean? If you go to the Bodleian Library, actually the original translations are in Arabic. Why? Because the Arabs translated Aristotle and Greeks into the fundamental basis of Oxford and Cambridge, which they think is quintessentially English, is actually already been taken over by Muslims. Does Tommy Robinson not know this? The crisis of the neoliberal state meant that ideologically they developed the hostile argument to try and win over layers of people from UKIP, but it's a contradiction that they can't really easily deal with, because the crisis from 2008 means that there's a continuing cut, there's continuing austerity, and the need for newer labours or new working parts of the working class to come in is absolutely central to an ageing population that takes place in Britain. Without immigration, the sheer growth, and I'm saying that people have a right to come here. We're against the borders. We're against the discrimination. But one of the other elements of where the ruling class use a hostile environment is the divide and rule strategy. Marx talks about this. He talks about the division between the English and the Irish workers, that they attempt, but he says by the papers, by the pulpit, and by other means, they try and keep people divided. So if you look at the papers at the time, the Daily Express and the Daily Mail, Daiquiri, they're constantly carrying an argument that the fundamental problem is are migrants that are eroding people's living standards. The two acts that took place, the 2012 and 2014 Act, tried to change the nature of the welfare state. So one of the things they did was, if you go to the National Health Service, then they were supposed to pass messages to the immigration service. They tried to turn the NHS into an immigration service. They tried to turn schools into immigration services. Part of the hostile environment argument was a strategy of divide and rule. Of the 6 million, one of the reports that came out of the Home Office was the most integrated workplaces were, guess where? The public sector. And one of the strategies they had was that they wanted to break that up. In other words, there was a constant strategy to divide up the very foundations of places like the NHS. My mother came here as a nurse, by the way, in the 1950s. And when you look at the Windrush generation in particular, it's actually interesting about how it's integrated into the sinews of capitalism. The actual ship, the Emperor Windrush, was the last ship that evacuated people out of Auschwitz. It was originally a German ship, had been taken over under the British Empire. They changed its nature and its designation because they wanted to change its role. And I think that's the feature of movements of people. People are moved depending upon what's happened. What caused that political shift has been taking place for the last, since 1968. In 1968, there's a man called Enoch Powell. He made a speech called Rivers of Blood, in which he said that Britain would be divided. We must literally be mad to allow large numbers of people to migrate from the New World. And part of that argument really was, it was a new argument, but what was interesting is, when Enoch Powell made that speech, the Prime Minister at the time, called Edward Heath, sacked him. And Enoch Powell was stripped of all his powers. And he ended up in Northern Ireland, in a backwater inside Northern Ireland. The difference is, in 2010, that same speech, or forms of that speech, was made by David Cameron and followed by the government, followed by Amber Rudd. What had caused that shift? Firstly, what caused that shift was the weakening of British capital. In some senses, there's an argument put forward by Paul Gilroy. I don't completely agree with it, but one of the things that he puts forward is the split in the ruling class between those people who invest in America, those are the people that basically want Brexit, and those people who invest in Europe. It fundamentally goes deep down to them. But also another element of the class is their shared delusionary sense of who they are. If you listen to the people that talk about the British Empire, you almost have to say to them, the amount of people that talk about it, the British Empire is never coming back. Right? It's never coming back because it was destroyed by anti-colonial movements that don't want the people there back. Right? And they complete. Seems like a confusing argument to many of these people. But I recently heard a Reith lecture that kind of waxed lyrical about how great the British Empire was. The problem is, tell it to the people that suffered in the Bengal famine. Tell it to the people that had their oil sold or robbed from them from the Middle East for threepence. There's a book called The Blood Never, or the people attacked inside Kenya. There's a book called The Blood Never Dried by Newton, and I suggest that people read it. But the ruling class as a whole has a delusionary sense of itself. He calls it colonial melancholia, right? That's how he describes it, in the sense of people's sense of decline. They feel like they're part of a declining system, and then they lash out at different people about who they attack. And what that means is that the Conservative Party, as a ruling class party, is constantly split and riven, and therefore its ideas are confused about what it wants to do. It has both wings in it. But also another thing happened was the party that was supposed to oppose them, the Labour Party, if you remember a man called Gordon Brown, he came up with a slogan called British Jobs for British Workers. Even there was a mug produced by that said that tough on an immigration course in the last election, and the election before that, which was produced by the Labour Party. And I think there was a political crisis inside the Labour Party about how to deal with the question of immigration. Concessions were given on that, and actually, instead of putting forward an argument about what the real problems were, there was a misdirection on it. And I think this has been intensified over the question of Fortress Europe, over the question of the treatment of refugees. You know, if you look at the response, Angela Merkel suddenly discovered a conscience and allowed 1 million refugees to come there. Look at what happened in Britain. They wouldn't even allow 200 children to come to this country. The hostile environment was built into the question of negating treating human beings as if they're second-class citizens, because I think the impact of UKIP, the impact of the growth of a political organisation like UKIP, was to pull politics to the right, particularly inside the right-wing party. And this is important to us because it explains part of the growth of the Tommy Robinson phenomena, where you suddenly have this idea, you know, it's called a demonstration on the 14th. I think it's very important that we break those organisations, the ideas that they're putting forward, because you have racist populists and you have Nazis together trying to shift politics to the right. It's what's happened in Italy. It's what's happening at the moment with the CDU inside Germany, where Merkel's under pressure by people who were formerly in the centre, pulling over the question about what you do about immigration. In other words, immigration has been used the race card has been used as a politics to be able to divide and break people. But I really want to end up with the question of two things. One, they didn't get away with it. You saw Theresa May have to apologise. I'm really apologising. It wasn't because of the Tory parties that she apologised. She apologised because of the demonstrations that took place, because of the letters that took place. In other words, there was a groundswell of resistance that said you can't treat people like this as a second-class citizens. The ruling class was forced to retreat. And I think this retreat's quite important to us, because for the first time, immigration didn't become something that was negative, it became something that was positive. And we have to build on this in terms of building opposition, I think, to the far right and to organisations like the Football Lads Alliance. I'll tell you one thing. You know, they wrote to us when we did the Windrush demonstration, at the height of it, and said, can we come along to your demonstration on Windrush, because we think this is wrong. What's happened to these people? What does that tell you? What it tells you is the sheer weight of public opinion meant that if you were a racist or you were pushing those arguments, you were isolated, and being opportunists as they are, they wanted to seize upon it, and it showed the contradiction in it. What did it show us? When they tried to say that the working class is the key driver of racism, what we learned from the hostile environment is the racism comes from the top of society. It is organised, it is systematic, it is institutional, and it has the effect of devastating people's lives. And the impact of it is, I'll finish up, and there's a report that said that it's not immigration that causes wages to go down. There's a report that came in the LSE. And what it said was that the correlation between union density and wages, that's the correlation, not the correlation between multicultural workforce. That's what the LSE report showed. And it also added one other thing. Where there were strikes and resistance, that's when people's pay went up. And I think that resistance is still a legacy today. The idea that our communities fight together against what happened around Grenfell, against the racists, against those people who divide us, is a basis from which we are able to resist. We have to use the anger against Windrush to turn it on the racist populist, on the Tories themselves, and actually fight for a better society, and actually understand that capitalism, although it divides people, also draws people together and builds a gravedigger that can change our society once and for all. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our next speaker, who is Smokey, who is an activist who's involved in the Notting Hill Carnival. And Smokey will be able to tell you more about himself and is going to speak to you now.
Okay. Thank you. First, I don't know about being an activist, but however, start off. My name is Adrian Joseph. Smokey Joy is a DJ name I got when I first started playing music about 50 years ago. Within the Caribbean community, I've hosted programs on BBC London. I had my own show for about 6 years on BBC London, various other stations like KISS, etc. Also a music producer, Caribbean music producer. So to get onto Notting Hill Carnival, which is why I think Wayman invited me along here. Well, when my parents came to this country in the 50s, they settled in Ladbroke Grove. Why Ladbroke Grove? Probably because it's the only place they could find, because there was a stigma attached to Ladbroke Grove and Notting Hill. It was known as the home of a mass murderer, Christie, who killed a load of people. Nobody wanted to know about it. I remember as a boy, 11 years, my father, on a Saturday, we had to go and help the old houses that they were fixing up to live in, because you know, if you spoke to the average English person that lived here, the first thing they say is, I want a house with one of these new modern high-rise with all the modern cons. They want to know about these old houses. So, of course, we fixed it up, along with the Irish and the African community. I made it a home, and a community developed in Ladbroke Grove. And out of that came the Notting Hill Carnival. Now, there's a movement against Notting Hill Carnival that's perpetuated by people in the media who have moved into the area of Ladbroke Grove and Notting Hill. But my argument with them is, you moved into the area, you knew there's a carnival there every August, so why are you against it? You know? You know, if I move next to a football stadium and I don't like football, I don't say sell your club because I don't like football. I have to put up with it because I know in the winter there's going to be football going on. So there you have it. So the people in the media now are really against, a lot of them against the Notting Hill Carnival, but the fact is that it's very popular. It's got about 3 million, they tell you 2 million people, they've been saying that for the past 20 years. I've been on the road with a float for 30 years, and I can tell you that 20 years ago there was 2 million people on the road. Now it's probably more like 3.5 million people. So, you know, now arguments against the Notting Hill Carnival, it cost us a lot of money. No, it doesn't. It generates over 150 million over a 4-day period for the whole borough of Kensington and Chelsea, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. There is currently an argument of a battle on to keep control, because the carnival's always been run by the grassroots community. But this year, the councillors in Kensington decided to put the carnival out to tender. The argument is that it's not your event to put out to tender. It begins to us. There are 5 disciplines that make up the people who take part in Notting Hill Carnival. They're the Steel Bands Association, who do a fantastic job in the summer, because right now I can tell you that every single steel band has got kids off the street practicing their pan for their panorama event, which takes place at Notting Hill event. It keeps them off the street, it keeps them occupied. I'm doing a function at the Tabernacle in Poet Square at the moment, and you're going there, kids, grandkids, parents, you could find 3 generations playing in a band. So that's a steel band movement. The sound systems that was brought in to develop the carnival in 1973 by Leslie Palmer, They've got the British Association of Sound Systems, who went out and negotiated electricity and spots and things to create a vibrant part of the Notting Hill Carnival. So you have that. You have the camps, the Carnival Arts Foundation, people who do the costumes, which I'm a member of. And they have young designers coming in, people who come out of art school, they're making costumes. A lot of these people have developed and gone on to do things in Hollywood, various parts of the world. Peter Minshall, who designed the opening ceremony for the Barcelona Olympics, and I think the one in Atlanta, started his designing career in Notting Hill Carnival at a community center. So, you know, there's a lot of good that comes out of it. So when a UKIP MP in the Mopac Review says, what does Notting Hill Carnival contribute to the community, I find that quite amazing. So that a statement could come out like that out of the politicians. Arguments against it. Crime is the first thing that comes up. Yeah, so the impression is that there's a load of criminals. This is not a place where you go and have fun. This is a place where you go to be mugged. That's a load of rubbish, because of all the festivals that takes place in Europe throughout the summer, Notting Hill Carnival has the least crime rate. In fact, I was told by a police officer in a meeting, because we do have, as a DJ, member of the DJ Association, we have a communication with the police to make sure that we work good on the road. And the police said to me, you know that there's more crime in Wimbledon than in Notting Hill. So in between the strawberries and cream, you know, there's a lot of, so you put it down to crime. Now, considering that we are the biggest festival, the most well-attended, right? Now, I'm not condoning crime. One crime is one crime too many. But you don't pin that on us every single time you go to the media. You never put out the good parts, the positive things that come out of the carnival. So that's the first thing that comes out. The cost of putting on the event. Well, you know, you just made the government, you know, 150 million, 20% is VAT, 30 million pounds in VAT the government has just made. You don't even spend £500,000 on putting on the event. You might spend 5 million on cleaning up, so you got 25. So I said to the council, I said, well, you know, when are you going to give me back my other 25 million that, you know, you've just made out of us over a 4-day period? So you've got that. The community value, like I said, the steel bands, etc., they do a lot of good work. So I think the main battle right now with Notting Hill Carnival is get people, remember, to take part in it. It's for everybody. It's based in Caribbean culture, right? That's the most important thing. It is what we've created, and we brought it to this country. In fact, now the carnivals are one of the fastest growing events worldwide. Every city, even LA is having a carnival, and their dream is to overtake Notting Hill Carnival in 5 years' time, right? The people from other cities around the world come to us in Notting Hill for advice how to run their carnival, because we have 50 years of experience and lots of ups and downs in it. So it's beyond me why the powers that be have so much trouble trying to embrace what the Caribbean community have brought to London, developed. I think it's a process, me personally, of gentrifying it and making it into the Notting Hill Festival, take the real essence of what it is. It's not a, you know, I teamed up with Love Music Hate Racism last year. We didn't go down with placards or screaming, but just by your presence and your T-shirt, it made a statement and we got covered on the news. So I'm considering that 70%, at least 70%, 60 to 70% of the people who attend Notting Hill Carnival are white people. So you're not running into a situation where this is a bunch of people from the Caribbean running around creating havoc. It's a well-attended event. We have the least crime, and I think that what we need right now is to get more people to be invested in, to get the truth of the carnival out, because most mass bands who put it on, there's a labor of love. They put their hand in their pocket. It costs £10,000 to put a truck on the road, a music truck, the whole shebang, putting it all together. Yeah? We do it, and everybody has a good time. And it's a release valve as well for people. Frustration, people going through a lot of trouble, they come and they have their 2 days of fun. I remember a situation in Trinidad where I come from. I went to Carnival. I go back every year, 2 or 3 times a year. And my aunt said to me, Ash Wednesday, you better get off this island quick, because there's a lot of arguments with the government, and there's going to be a big general strike, and, you know, it's going to be civil war. And Ash Wednesday come along, and so who's going to protest? I said, me? I'm going to the beach. You know, the politicians were sorted out. And what that shows is that people came out, they had fun, they enjoyed themselves, they got rid of their frustrations, and they left it to the politicians to do what there was be. So it is Carnival, and like anything else, the festival is a great release valve. So people are always putting it down, and I think that we need to get people to understand more of what Carnival is, and more to the point, to get people to participate in Carnival. You know, it's not, yes, it's based in Caribbean culture, but it's not for Caribbean people, it's for everyone. I think we have to start showing the positive side of Notting Hill Carnival. There are carnivals all over the UK. I think Leeds they might be older than Notting Hill. I think they're celebrating 50 years this year. So there's a lot of good that comes out of carnival culture with the kids, and the steel bands, the people who are doing the art. I think the Windrush generations, I'll be honest with you, when I came, it didn't take me long to realize when I came here in 1961 to join my parents that I just left paradise and ended up in hell. Yeah? And that's the truth, you know? And walking around, but you know, within your community, everybody sticks together and you make it work. So I think the Windrush generation has given London a gift in the form of Notting Hill Carnival. And it's a piece of our culture and a heritage that I would like to see people embrace more. And instead of showing the negative side of it all the time, come out and give us a lot more support. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Janet Spakowski from Harlow branch in Essex. As Weyman said, the government wasn't really expecting the wave of public outrage. They didn't understand that communities were integrated, that this was your next door neighbour that was being deported or put in a detention centre or whatever. And so even the right-wing press, the Daily Mail and what have you, Conservative ministers rushed to say, oh dear, you know, this shouldn't have happened at all. This was some rogue member of the Home Office who didn't understand that the hostile environment didn't really mean hostile environment, that targets didn't really mean targets. You know, you weren't really supposed to be having these targets for deporting people or putting people in detention centres. And so the rhetoric switched to these wonderful people who'd made such a contribution to our country, coming over here and working in the NHS and so on. But what this has done has been, it's been to set up this division between good migrants, good immigrants, and bad immigrants. And so there are these wonderful people who've been here for years, who've contributed to our public services, but then there are these other people who might be a bit different, who you know, go along wearing a hijab, or congregate around the mosque, or speak Polish and congregate around the local Catholic church. And so even if, you know, you've fought a battle on one front, and to one extent you feel, well, yeah, you know, that one has gone for a little while, you know, racism doesn't go away, and it comes in waves, and we can't stop fighting it on whatever front.
Thank you.
When the wretched Amber Rudd stepped down over the Windrush scandal, we got the new Home Secretary, Sajid Darwin, came in, and then he stood up in a debate in that House of Commons, and he said something along the lines of, Diane Abbott hasn't got the monopoly of anger over what happened to the Windrush generation, you know, because apparently he was equally angry. Now, his anger didn't stop him from voting for the 2012 attacks on immigrants or the 2014 attacks on immigrants, but he was angry. He was really angry. It's not enough to be angry. There were 5 Labour MPs that voted against the 2014 Act. One of them was Jeremy Corbyn, one of them was Diane Abbott, one of them was David Lammy. Those people, you know, Jeremy Corbyn has been lambasted over the so-called anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party. Actually, Jeremy Corbyn put his credentials on the line to vote against racism every time. His critics in the Labour Party shut up and sat on their hands and did not vote for the 2014 Act that Theresa May brought in. Theresa May was Home Secretary between 2010 and 2015. She oversaw the deportation of well over 7,000 people back to whatever corners of the world she saw fit to deposit them. We need a campaign that will actually kick her ass, will make her responsible for her actions. It's not enough to be angry, it's not enough to let these swine off the hook. And I want to pay tribute to the Notting Hill Carnival, because Smokey made some great reasons why we should treasure the Notting Hill Carnival. But I don't really care how much money it makes, although that's a reasonable thing. I don't really care what the crime figures are, whatever. The Notting Hill Carnival came out of people like Claudia Jones, activists and anti-racists who called for a cultural act of unity when the racists were on the streets of Notting Hill in the late 50s. It should be celebrated because it's our working class activity that says we are together against scumbags like Amber Rudd, against scumbags like Theresa May, and yes, against scumbags like Sergeant Doe, who only care about money, who only care about capitalism, who will use us and then try to divide us through racism. Two fingers to that.
Yeah, so you can hear me now, yeah? So about 6 weeks ago, I had the misfortune to go to a conference in France that was titled Enoch Powell 1968, Windrush 1948, The Legacy of Windrush. Keynote speaker was Trevor Phillips. Now he said, and I quote him because it's indelibly etched in my mind, something happened 2 weeks ago that is far more important and will live much longer in the memory of the British people, by which time Windrush will become an irrelevant question in a pub quiz somewhere. And I was sitting there thinking, well, what on earth happened 2 weeks ago that could be so monumentally important that I missed it? And then he started waxing on at length about the marriage between Harry and whatever her name was. And this was a more important thing for multicultural Britain than anything else, which says a lot about Trevor Phillips, really. What he represents, really, irrespective of whether he's a black man or not, is the duality of the establishment and what happens in working class communities. And I think that duality is the thing that's important for us. They hate it. The media hate it. The Tories hate it. The ruling class. They hate the idea that actually when you put working class people together, they actually get on. The Tories have been at this forever and a day. In 1957, they set up a secret undercommittee with a guy at the head of Tory MP called KB Pace. His job was to gather around information that backed up the assumptions that black people were oversexed, they brought disease, they were lazy and more naturally able to do crime. That was a job of this Conservative Party secret committee that was gathering information towards the 1962 Immigration Act. So, was it Joy Gardner who got killed by immigration when they wrapped her head and they suffocated her? There's been so many of them, so they've always been at it. But our side is different. Our side is mods in the 1960s going to West Indian clubs in Soho. It's black and white skinheads in the 1960s listening to rocksteady music. Our side is black and white kids going to jazz funk clubs in the 1970s, going to reggae clubs in the 1980s, going to rave clubs in the 1990s. That's our side. When working class people get together, it doesn't matter. The fashions, the accents, the lingo, the buzzwords, all of these things are interspersed between black and white people. On our level, it's the other side that they can't stand.
I don't know if that one's working.
Oh, right.
I haven't had anyone else indicate at the moment, I don't think. So people have a thing. I'm sure lots of people have got opinions on what it means to be British or questions that you want to raise. So just indicate if you do while the next person's speaking.
Yeah, what do you do? I lived in Bristol for a while, and St Paul's Carnival, which was inspired by the Notting Hill Carnival, was one of the best things that Bristol has got. It's fantastic, people coming together and dancing. I wanted to pick up on the word gentrification, because that set alarm bells for me, because it's something that Smokey said about gentrification. And it reminded me of going to a festival that was in Cornwall with historical roots of hundreds of years, of people dressing up in flowers, getting off their heads and dancing for 3 days in the streets. And we thought, that'll be good. We were on a camping holiday. And we went down there all dressed up and ready for 3 days of dancing in the streets with great historical 300 roots. And what was it? They sold us tickets, or they tried to sell us tickets, and we had to go into a little enclosure and stand there and watch people dressed up in, ballroom gowns, dancing sedately around the houses. And that's what they'd done to that fantastic festival. That is gentrification. And I think our rulers don't like working class people doing anything pleasurable or enjoyable that they can't make money out of and that they can't control. The Flower Festival had been reduced to that, a money-making thing. And it was really quite sad. There was no fun in it at all, so we left anyway. But look at the history of football. It used to be villages turning out for days on end and everybody playing football together. And it's reduced to people passively standing behind the fences and watching the professionals do it. Look at the history of the rave culture. People dancing all night and having a bloody good time together. And it's been illegalised and oppressed and reduced again. The history of the Pride Festival, having to fight to keep in touch with our roots of struggle against the people who want to gentrify it and sell tickets and make it respectable. Our rulers really don't like it when we dance or anything that we do that we're under control. And they particularly don't like it when black and white people dance together. Because look at the NHS picket lines. We stand together, we win. They don't like that.
Yourself, and then yourself. See if this will work. Yeah. Right. There you are. Hold it a bit away from your mouth.
Okay, thank you. Peter Fryer, his great historian of Black Britain, wrote a book once, The Politics of Windrush, which I suggest people check out at some point. Because I was thinking, a year or so ago, how this anniversary about Windrush, 70 years, was going to be commemorated. And I was thinking this is something, it's going to be very, very sanitised history from the ruling class, but they're going to use Windrush, in a sense, to say these are good migrants who came here and worked hard, who'd been in the RAF, worked hard, put their heads down, paid taxes, good migrants, versus some, new immigrant Muslims, not somehow British in some sense. And that's how I thought the ruling class was going to play, how I thought this anniversary was going to play out. In reality, of course, Windrush scandal, the deportation of a hostile environment, people have talked about, obviously the politics of Windrush. Well, it was something very different. I was thinking, we need to try and dig out the story of racism that those early pioneers who came here suffered instinctively when they arrived. But I think the other thing that's interesting about Windrush and why I think it's important to think about how it's commemorated itself is, there's a sense in which, is the example, Trevor Phillips' view of it all, essentially something that can be, it's a stepping stone to Britain becoming more liberal, more integrated, tolerant, as though history's a smooth path upwards. And Windrush can fit into a kind of liberal narrative about Britishness in those terms. In fact, and this is where people like Trevor Phillips show their complete it's not ignorance, because he wrote a bloody book. He wrote a book on Windrush, didn't he? He's not ignorance, but it was a struggle. It was a major civil rights struggle against institutional racism that was waged by those pioneers. We talked about Claudia Jones and the cultural aspects of it, and then it fed into the Black Power movement later on. That's the real history. It was a history of struggle, and it's not surprising it was a history of struggle, really, in many ways, because the Windrush pioneers who came over were not just, as it's often portrayed, they fought in a lot of them have been in the RAF, air crews and stuff in Britain, and then gone back and then came back to Britain and to mother country. It's the case. Final point is just that generation, 10 years before 1948, the Caribbean was rocked by a wave of massive labour rebellions, mass strikes across the Caribbean that were brutally repressed by the British colonial state. 46 people killed, 429 wounded, thousands imprisoned. That swept across the Anglophone Caribbean, that wave of labour rebellions. It was Jamaica's most significant ever rebellion in its history in terms of geographical spread and the numbers involved in the mass strike in 1938. Stuart Hall, final point, he was only 6 at the time, late Jamaican intellectual. He talks about that historic conjuncture of 1938 as a profoundly anti-colonial movement. But people of the Windrush generation came with that memories of anti-colonial struggles, anti-colonial resistance going back to times of slavery and before, and that gave them, that gave them the confidence to fight and make modern multiracial Britain and help pave the way for actually Britain becoming, in some senses, alongside the other decolonialism, decolonisation, the other anti-colonial movements in the 50s and 60s, a more, slightly less imperial place. They played a critical role in the making of modern Britain. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's yourself and then yourself. Thank you.
Hi, comrades. I think there's been a yearly event. There's a yearly event which is happened not too long ago, which is turning into a scene of drunken debauchery, of fighting, of Class A drug taking, of people having sex out in the open. That event is called Raw Ascot. And I think... I think we should be calling on the police to shut it down. Yeah. The speaker before last talked about gentrification. Actually, I'm from Hackney, and it's funny. A few weeks ago, I was talking to a guy, and we were talking about when Hackney in the 80s and in the 90s, Hackney used to be the sort of the centre, the sort of capital of black clubs. There was clubs like Cubies, Full Races, All Nations, and it was a really vibrant place. And actually, people used to come down from Birmingham and Manchester to come to the clubs in Hackney. What's happened to those clubs now? Those clubs have gone. Those clubs have gone, and now in Hackney, what do we see? We see £1 million houses, we see £1.5 million houses, and actually we see situations where you go down Kingston Road, which used to be a main thoroughfare for these black clubs, and now all you see is young 20-something white professionals. Got nothing against them, but we're the only black people you see now are the people on the door protecting them, and it's absolutely disgraceful, and I think actually what's happening is actually estate agents, bankers are trying to create a world where our culture is actually pushed to the margins. But what's funny is actually I'm a dog owner, and I quite often walk through open spaces in the parks. And in Hackney, what you see is Hackney's quite obviously a very multicultural area. And in the parks, in the summer in particular, the parks have become really vibrant places. There's a large black Portuguese Angolan community in Hackney, and on one bench you'll see the Portuguese, you'll see the young African Caribbeans, but you'll also see Polish people, Ukrainian people. You'll see different people come to mix, and even they try and get rid of working class culture, and they try and get rid of us. Actually, you'll see people come together and fight, and I think it's really, really important that we defend places where people can go. I just want to say finish up on this. I think the Windrush scandal sort of created opportunities for us. In Islington, Stand Up to Racism called an event, and actually I was really shocked because the council backed this event, and it meant that we can get lots of people here. But we didn't just say defend the Windrush generation, we said defend the Windrush generation and EU migrants, and it gave us an opening to be able to talk about class unity and what it means. And I think it's been a wake-up call to some of my mum's generation who thought that actually Brexit was about getting rid of Eastern Europeans. The hostile environment creates racism, and it creates racism for everyone, and unless we all stand together and fight it, we're all going to be doomed. So actually what's happened is actually I think the Windrush now is actually not only become a beacon for the people the pioneers who came out, it's actually going to become a watchword for fighting against racism and fighting against, against imperialism. And it gives us, as I say, gives us a good opportunity to unite working class people.
All right, well, I'm not going to be quite as exciting as him, but the thing was that we've been talking about racism now and the ways in which the government is perpetuating it at the moment with the Windrush generation and trying to stop the Notting Hill Carnival. And I think what it might be worth talking about is why bother? Why be racist? Why try and stop black and white people dancing together? Why try and stop people receiving health care? Why shut down the Notting Hill Carnival? Because ultimately, if there wasn't a really, a deeper reason, you could just say to the people, well, it's 4 days out of the year, what's your problem? Come on. But I think we have to put that in the context of what's going on in the world. We have to put that in the context of austerity and of the financial crisis, because the reason that they try to divide us is because they want to distract us from fighting them. They want us to fight among each other, and they want us to sort of be so distracted by that we don't take them on, because they know that the power that we have as the working class and as the people who run society, essentially, we run society from the bottom, they think they run it, and we kind of let them because we don't gather together and fight back. And I think what is so important about keeping the Notting Hill Carnival and keeping our culture alive is that we come together in defiance of this, and we come together in defiance of this to reassert our unity in the face of, I would say, every single part of the media and the ruling class and the government that tells us that we just shouldn't. That didn't really make sense.
I'm just going to call Smokey to make some concluding remarks, and then Weyman. Thank you.
Yeah, I just like to pick up on the speaker, gentleman, talking about Hackney, because it actually reminded me of Pembury Estate in Hackney. Now, Pembury Estate in Hackney, my brother lived in Pembury Estate, and we actually opened a record shop in Hackney on Clarence Road, which is right opposite Pembury Estate in the 80s. We were there for about 20 years. And one of the amazing things is the sense of community that the kids had in that Pembury Estate. Out of Pembury Estate, Paul Hardcastle, who lived on Pembury Estate, came out with hits. The kids would come in and say, Smokey, you're in the music business. I got this tune. That's where the jungle music, all those raves came from. They created their hits, and they came into shops. We took them around to Vinyl Cuts, the pressing plant in Stratford, and they were on the way. So the sense of community. One of the other things that was quite amazing is that I think I spent more time helping young kids making applications for jobs in my shop, because their parents were working, and sometimes when they come home, we had a Pac-Man machine in the shop, and they would just come in, and we kind of kept them off the streets. There's a sense of, because the shop became almost a community place for these youngsters. So it's kind of important that within community, that whole sense of community has been lost. I went into Hackney the other day. We actually lost the shop because the council, we had a sitting tenant who didn't pay us rent for about 15 years. And when we tried to get it, the council said we were wrong. And we had to, they closed us down on noise. So, but it's quite interesting to hear what you're saying about, it just reflects on the importance of community, because these kids made their music. Paul Hardcastle went on to have world #1 hits, right? The jungle music, became a massive phenomenon, started in Pembury Estate. So I think it's something worth bearing in mind.
Thank you very much, and we're delighted to have you here with us. And Wayman Bennett is going to conclude the meeting.
Comrades, it's a very interesting discussion, because what we're talking about is polarisation, both economically and politically. That since the crisis of 2008, that the people at the top of society, the £1 trillion crisis in Britain has led to them enriching themselves, and the justification of part of that polarisation is to use racism to divide and rule. It's at the heart of what they do. It's at the heart of how they explain things. And people knew it then, didn't they? Do you remember the 2011 riots that took place? And people taking a packet of crisps and getting 10 years for doing that? Do you remember what they said at the time when they opened the courts for extra time? They turned around and said, you're responsible for what you do. You knew what you were doing, even if you were a child, that you were going to be given that. And then you have a government that comes along with a minister. I have no idea about sending people away and letting them die and not get cancer treatment. Nobody, it's not a criminal responsibility. Nobody in the Home Office is responsible. And actually, we shouldn't let those people off the hook. We should, even now, we should not let those people off the hook. Somebody signed it, somebody pushed it forward. And part of the reason why it's important is because they're more racist than anybody else. That's the truth. The immigration services, the police, you see, they're more racist than anybody else, and they don't understand our class or where we're coming from, what it is. It's not an accident that it's 70 years for the NHS and 70 years since Windrush, because it talks about a layer of people coming to work in the heart of capitalist societies, actually make them and build them, but it also tells you about the power of that in terms of being able to change things. What are they actually afraid of? I think they're afraid of what happened in the riots. They're afraid of resistance that comes from those people coming together, and they use racism as a simple, crude tool to divide and rule, but also something else as well. I think the ruling class is in deep crisis about how to deal with its own problems. Well, we know this. Theresa May, if you ask her what she's going to do, what's her strategy? It's called tomorrow. Do you mean I'm still alive, I'm still breathing? That's my strategy, right? That's the truth of it. The other problem we have is a problem on our own side. Trevor Phillips, the right-wing Labour, when they talk about getting rid of the Tories or attacking them, suddenly they're the more nostalgic than anything. I was on a programme about the World Cup, and they said to me, who do you support? I said, I support the World Cup. And they said, no, which country do you support? I said, I support the World Cup. I support everybody in the World Cup. They said, you can't do that. That's not the rule, right? I said, well, you've never come across a socialist internationalist then, because that's what we support. And actually, when you go to Liverpool and they're cheering for an Egyptian Muslim and saying if he's Muslim and he goes to a mosque, it's good enough for us, that says something about our class. It says something about the potential. You'll never hear a Tory minister saying that. How do we know this? Listen to what Wazi says. She says he goes to meetings and she's racially abused, because it goes to the heart of the way the ruling class not just are in terms of a strategy, it goes to the heart of the problem. It also reflects something about our class-based tradition. The trade union movement, the Chartist movement, was an integrated, the first working class movement was a movement of black and white people together. If you want to know where Claudia Jones is buried, she's buried next to Karl Marx in Highfield, in Highgate Cemetery. Why is he buried next to Karl Marx? Because she was a refugee from America. When Donald Trump talks about people coming and attacking people, he kicked an American, that ruling class kicked an American black woman out because she was fighting for civil rights. When she came here, did she stop? No, she didn't. She fought Mosley's black shirts. She put a tradition of people fighting. That's where the carnival comes from. That's what they hate. They hate the fact that an aristocratic man would dress in a black shirt and be anti-Semitic and be defeated by a movement that was led by a black woman in which black and white people came together against anti-Semitism, against racism together. It's tradition of our class, but it also requires something else. She was in the Communist Party, actually. It's not true she was just an individual. When she formed that stuff, that you're not an individual. You have to have a political position, a political organisation. And I tell you, when you look at this country and you hear about people like C.L.R. James, who comes from whatever it is, they came from a political tradition. And I want to say that I think political tradition and the change for struggle against racism and black liberation is central to what we do. One of the reasons why I'm standing here, I believe, is because I think I'm a revolutionary socialist. I'm proud to say I'm a revolutionary socialist. This will be on the DFLA video now, in terms of going out and stuff like that. But I'm proud to say that. The reason why I'm proud to say that is because I don't believe you can get change without fundamentally fighting the structures that produce it. Racism came out of slavery, came out of the economic point of people to exploit. When slavery ended, it was because Toussaint Louverture led a revolution inside Haiti. What did they do in this country? They compensated the slave owners. Oh dear, you've lost all control of treating human beings like second class. They compensated them. By the way, David Cameron's family, that's where they got their money from originally. Not only do I want my country back, I want my money back. Do you know what I mean? And the point about that is the real reparations come when people struggle and change. And that's what this meeting's about. Hostile environment. It's about building a new hostile environment to the people that run our society. I'm hostile to Theresa May. I'm hostile to Theresa May because he's hostile to us. I'm hostile to Tommy Robinson because actually Stephen Yoxley is hostile to the tradition that he comes from, because it's fascism, which is a death knell to the working class inside our movement. But I tell you one thing about hostile environment, I'm proud that our class defeated them and pushed them back a bit. But it's more important that we push them back totally, because it's the first time, I think, for this generation since the Second World War, that you see children in cages, you see people inside the Bundesbank that come from a Nazi tradition, you see women being attacked inside Bolton and put on life support machines because Nazis feel angry and start to take to our streets. There is no time to lose. I want the Notting Hill Carnival, but we have to build a movement that will defeat the far right, because the ruling class in this country, in terms of chasing after vote, have started a fire that they can't put out. They've started a position of divide and rule. And our role right now is to make sure we defeat them, but more importantly, I think that one day we want people to look back at racism and say that we were the weird people. To me, we lived in a society that divided people and looked upon just not their colour, their race, their religion. But for socialism is about doing away with that, and that's what we want. I know I'm going on too much, but the final thing is I want people to join the Socialist Workers Party, because we have to have something for ourselves that fights against all those people that are not prepared to stand on our side. We'll stand with Jeremy Corbyn, we'll stand with all those people that want change, but for fundamental change in our society, we have to change the people, the 1% of people that own and control it. So join us, but also, more importantly, fight for a better society so our children's children will look at this and look at something that belonged in the past and shouldn't be on the history books. So I'll stop there.